So just looking at the numbers going up there. So we'll get started. Hello and welcome to the MBA Fundamentals live Q&A webinar. Thank you for joining us. We've got a lot to get through, but I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started properly. So just to note that we are recording this session for the benefit of those who couldn't join live today. I know a number of you signed up for this. We'll be sharing the recording shortly after we finished here today. And we have a Q&A box for any questions that come up while we're on the call. We have a list of questions that we're going to run through to start with, but for anything new that comes up, please do use the Q&A box and we'll get through as many of those as we can throughout this session. So in terms of today's host, we're very fortunate to be joined today by both Professor Andrew Stephen, who's the program lead on this course, MBA Fundamentals. He's also a leading faculty member throughout the Side Business School as a whole. We also have Attie Lotz with us today, who's a program tutor on the course. And my name's Alex Whitehouse. I'm on the end there, part of the home team here within Program Sales, Executive Education. So I'll field any logistical questions that come up. But without any further ado, I will hand to our faculty. Attie, are you okay to take us away with the questions?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Alex. Firstly, I want to start off by saying welcome, Professor. It's awesome that you could join us.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. Looking forward
That's
to the
great.
chat.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of great questions come in from potential participants. But before we dive into them, I wanted to know maybe you can share a bit about what you're currently working on.
Oh, there's lots of stuff. So I'm for everybody, so by means of introduction, I'm a marketing professor at the business school. And I've been at Side Business School for about 10 or so years, and leading our marketing faculty and other roles in the faculty as well. But what I've always been really interested in actually is maybe two things, both of which I'm working on currently in various projects. One is about new technologies coming into business, and how all kind of parts of businesses, not just marketing and sort of my home discipline, but all functions grapple with these new technologies to find ways to use them in value creating ways, value for the business, value for other stakeholders, and particularly value for customers. Um, and the other sort of thing that I'm particularly interested in is how businesses interact with um, bigger social issues, let's call them, or bigger global issues. And I've been working a lot, for instance, in recent years on what we call inclusive marketing or progressive marketing. So making sure that advertising is not perpetuating harmful stereotypes, for instance, and is more inclusive and more equitable. And showing how that's actually not just good for society, but actually good for business. And then to your question, Addie, literally this morning, I've been working on a new research project that we're formally announcing in a month's time, but I can talk about it with a massive organization called the World Federation of Advertisers, which is sort of like the United Nations for brands, if you want to think of it like that, big trade organization that represents advertisers around the world and their interests. And we're kicking off a project with them around trying to really demonstrate the business impact of good sustainability efforts in business with respect to how they communicate about their products and their brands, not just sort of the behind the scenes things that businesses are doing to sort of reduce their carbon footprints, but actually how they talk about that in the marketplace to consumers and customers in ways that are credible and verifiable, not greenwashing or things like that, and showing, hopefully, when brands do that and do that well, it doesn't just pay off in terms of being good for the planet, but actually good for the business and good for growing their brands and largely because consumers will vote with their wallets on things that they care about. So working a lot on that sort of thing at the moment.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, and that's very closely linked to, I think it's module 9 in the course where we
It
cover
is.
impact from within, which is one of my favorite modules, which is fantastic. Now, talking about the future, looking at the future, what do you view as the future developments in marketing that are likely to be shaped by AI? And follow-up question to that is, what are the most important pitfalls for businesses to watch out for?
All right. Well, maybe I'll start with one pitfall to kick it off, and then talk about sort of the AI related future of marketing. But pitfall is standing still. We're in an age at the moment where there's rapid technological innovation. AI is obviously a big part of that as it becomes increasingly more sophisticated and general purpose and accessible for any business, large or small, for any type of organization, public or private sector for that matter, wherever you are in the world. And then for you as professionals, at whatever career stage you're at, standing still or just sort of saying, "Oh, let's wait and see what happens," or let's sort of learn from others instead of learning through our own experiences. That's a real potential pitfall, because if you stand still, others are going to be moving faster ahead of you, and that will just widen that knowledge and expertise and experience gap. And so if we bring that to AI and marketing, I mean, the big thing at the moment is agentic. This is not just true in marketing. I was talking to a chief technology officer of a large bank yesterday, and this is what they're talking about for internal processes. But certainly from a marketing standpoint, this is the big thing. And in fact, I was on a panel at an industry conference, Advertising Week in Europe, which was in London this week, on Tuesday afternoon, talking about this. And basically what we were talking about is, consumers are getting familiar with AI, and it's not just young ones. It's maybe not my 80-year-old mother yet, but there is a wide and diverse segments and consumers that are using AI to help them form consideration sets and then make choices of which products or services to buy from those consideration sets. And so AI, in some sense, it's almost like an influencer, like you'd see an influencer in your Instagram feed that might influence you to be interested in a certain brand, or say in a B2B context, opinion leaders or key opinion leaders who might influence enterprise buying decisions. AI and LLM, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever, serves as an influencer. Then if we sort of fast forward and say, but okay, what happens in an agentic AI context? Well, essentially that influencer is then going to be making more of those decisions in a more automated way on your behalf. And the interesting thing for marketers is that opens up a new sort of dimension or vector for optimization. We've talked about search engine optimization for 30 years. How do we make sure we show up in Google results? Well, now we need to figure out how do we show up in an LLM, in ChatGPT, for instance. And that's a different set of challenges. And it largely rests on brands or companies making sure that there's credible, verifiable, publicly available information out there about what they're offering. And the LLMs will try and, like an agent will try and serve its master, its user, like a puppy dog. It's trying to please you. And so it's trying to please you by helping you make right choices. So it's going to understand you based on what it's inferred from all the chats that you've had. What are your values? And then use those to find products or services or brands that match those values. And those values might be traditional things like, I'm very price sensitive, or I value, great craftsmanship or good engineering or high quality. But those values also could be, and we're increasingly seeing in some of the research we've got underway at the moment, those values are, well, who am I as a person and what do I care about in the world? Whether that's sustainability or social issues or human rights or whatever it might be. Our LLMs, our agents for consumers shopping, are going to try and find brands and products and services that match our values, not just our values in that product category and traditional consumer values, but bigger than that. And so I think that the issue in marketing that everybody's talking about at the moment is, how do we make sure that we show up our offers show up really well in an LLM environment where agents are doing what I just described.
So you're mentioning values. And it kind of closely linked to that for me. It's not just the alignment of values, but there's also ethics come into play, right? And I think maybe the world that we're moving into, how can businesses go about addressing these ethical challenges that come with relying on extensive data, the use of black box AI, surveillance style marketing in practice?
Yeah, well, I mean, we could spend hours talking about this, but sort of the sort of the shorter answer is it has to start with a set of ethical principles, and that comes from the top in an organization. It gets lived by everybody in that organization, but it has to come from the top, and it has to be aligned with the sort of the strategy and the purpose and the mission and the values and all those sorts of things. So it's sort of um, it's not ethics for the sake of ethics, but it's ethics and responsibility um, in a way that makes sense for the business and its stakeholder groups, including its customers. Um, and is also a reflection of what is sort of right in the world. And so if we think about technology and AI, I mean, depending on where you are in the world, there's more or less regulation around this. And depending on which type of regulation or source of regulation, there's more or less of an emphasis on things like transparency, um, and sort of responsible approaches to AI. So I think, for a business, you need to be aware of these things, but it shouldn't be seen purely as a sort of a compliance need, but doing it because this is what is core to the values and the mission of the business. And so with AI, the big things include transparency, responsible use of data, disclosure of if something. I mean, a big thing in marketing, particularly on the content side, is disclosing when something is AI generated or not. It's getting increasingly difficult to detect if something is obviously AI generated, particularly in image, say in digital content, say in a news feed. So being honest and transparent about that is important, because it helps people make more informed choices. And at the end of the day, that's what that's all about.
Sorry, I need to find my mute button.
Mm.
So I don't think I'm alone here. And, it's when you start worrying a bit about what are the skills that I need going forward. And in this world that we're moving in, this very AI-enabled world, what do you view as the skills that people will need? Not just in marketing, maybe, but maybe you can
Mhm.
answer specifically for marketing if you want, for professionals to stay relevant.
Well, I mean, it's the skills that are needed, I think, are still kind of the core business skills, which is reflected in the design of our MBA Fundamentals program, incidentally. So strategy, finance, operations, marketing, etc. Um, these are still fundamental skills because, I mean, even in an AI world where, for sure, some of the tasks or lots of the tasks can be handed off to AI, and it can probably can do it faster, can do it cheaper, and perhaps even better than sort of the human status quo. I think, thinking more strategically and also thinking from a more sort of leadership standpoint. And I don't mean just sort of C-suite leaders. I mean leaders at every level of an organization, even just, managers in the middle somewhere. Um, we have to be credible leaders, which means we have to understand things. So the fundamentals of business don't go out the window, just because we could now, have AI do that. And sure, I could go into, an LLM of my choice and get it to do a financial analysis of something, or have it come up with a marketing plan, and it will do that, and it will probably do a pretty good job, and certainly increasingly pretty good job. Um, but there's also a generic aspect to that, which doesn't always work well from a strategic standpoint for business, because we know that a core tenet of corporate and business strategy is we need to uniquely differentiate ourselves and position ourselves in markets where we can sort of have unique propositions to our customers that they're going to value, and value more than the alternatives or the competitors. And so AI can help you, but it should be seen as a partner and an enabler of human creativity, human strategic thinking, and strong human-oriented business thinking, because that's where the innovation's really going to still keep on coming from. And so I'm a big proponent of that. I'm very much an AI person. I've created many of our AI programs at Oxford Said, and I think AI's generally has a lot of potential to be very, very good for business, and it can be very good for business. But the way to think about it is we still want to have humans at the helm. Humans are in control and setting the direction, and using AI to help enable us to do what we're trying to do and achieve our purpose in an organization. So strong business sort of acumen, strong understanding of fundamentals, but casting those fundamentals in the context that we now live in and that we're moving in towards in the years to come. That's really the way to think about it. So skills and capabilities in terms of particular job roles may change over time, but those kind of big pillars of, to be successful in business, you need to have a deep understanding of these things. Those foundations aren't going away. They just need to be adapted to the new world.
That's great. We've got on the area of skills, we've got some questions in the Q&A, which I want to relate it to this. So we got somebody asking, where do you typically see the biggest mind shift in the sense of this program, how it can help you change the way you think rather than just adding new skills?
Yeah, no, I mean the way that myself and all of the faculty colleagues, there's a lot of other faculty involved with this program and delivering the different modules. The way that we've all thought about it and designed it and evolved the design over time as well is to really focus on one of the things that probably for 800 years at Oxford has been really, really core to how we think about education, which is about developing critical thinking skills. And so this program very much is designed to, yes, let's dive deep into finance, or let's dive deep into marketing, or let's dive deep into strategy and entrepreneurship and innovation, and so on and so on across the 9 modules. It's about giving you knowledge and an understanding of those things, because we know that participants on this program will come with certain levels of understanding, but often in sort of 1 or 2 of those domains and not the whole picture. And so we want to kind of lift everybody up to have sort of the latest understanding of the fundamentals in each of those sort of modules, but then to really be able to develop across those modules critical thinking skills, which help you, I like to say, connect the dots between these things. Because one of the things that we know in business education, and we know certainly in the Said Business School, is successful leaders of the future of businesses, as well as successful business practitioners now at whatever career stage, are the ones who can think critically, think strategically. They have the knowledge, but importantly, the 4th thing is they can connect the dots across the different business functions or disciplines. And I can tell you that is what senior leaders in organizations value, because every time I spend a lot of time on executive programs running these for sort of C-suite or very close to C-suite level participants. And time again, the big thing that they say, the big challenge they have when they're thinking about things like future workforce, they think about current workforce as well, they think about skills and capabilities. They say what's missing is, the big problem is we live in silos. I could be on a program with, let's say supply chain and operations leaders in a big multinational. And you know what they say? They say, for us to really achieve what we need to do, we need to start collaborating more. And we need ways to do that. The way to do that is to not just go and tell your people, oh, okay, you need to go and work with the people over in, finance better or whatever. But they need a sort of a way of collaborating, ways of working. And that comes from a shared or a sort of a mutual understanding of each other's expertise, and why, let's say, supply chain and finance work together, or why marketing and innovation work together, and so on and so forth. And so that connecting the dots is really, really important. And so that's definitely a way that we've designed this program. And indeed, there's 9 modules, and they're structured into 3 blocks. And those blocks, within those blocks, have different business functions or business disciplines that are deliberately put together so that you're forced on the program to see how they fit together within that sort of set of 3, so to speak, to kind of force the connecting the dots and say, okay, so this is how this thing and that thing fit together, even though they seem like they're quite different. So yeah, so I think that's one of the ways that this program, very much in line with how we think generally at the Side Business School, is designed to really help people do more than just kind of understand the basics of each of these business disciplines or functions, but rather develop critical thinking around how they fit together in important strategic ways.
Yeah, and I think it's evident in the assessments that we have, how it promotes that integrative, holistic thinking in integrating the various modules into one assessment and connecting all the dots. So I think that does it fantastically well. One question we also had in the chat was, dare I say, AI slop. We're all bombarded with all sorts of AI adverts and videos and all these things. And how do we bridge? I know earlier you mentioned, aligning values is one way of doing it, but how do we bridge that credibility gap that we're starting to experience now?
Yeah. The problem of AI slop, or from a content marketing standpoint, what it might be is very easy to generate and increasingly low cost and high speed, but that doesn't mean it's good content. And so if we kind of take a step back and one of the things, I'm sure many of you on this webinar have heard the term customer centricity. If you're a marketing person, you would know that deeply what that means. But the idea is, you put the customer at the center of everything, and you're always trying to do what's best for your customer or customers. Not always necessarily what makes them happy. If they've got a complaint or something, that's not customer centricity. It's rather designing everything around creating value for those customers, value that's meaningful to them. So if you think about that in the context of AI slop, quick and easy and cheap AI generated content, is that really creating value for your customers, or is it really just clogging their feed with lousy content? So I think about it in terms of you can compete in different ways. You can compete with sort of a race to the bottom, which might help your P&L, might help your cost base get really, really low, but might not actually tee up good relationships with your customers that will pay off over time because they're loyal, they keep coming back, they keep on spending, they spread good word of mouth, etc. So you could race to the bottom. That might be a good short-term competitive strategy from a cost minimization standpoint. Or you could build long-term customer value, which keeps those customers coming back and helps you grow your business. AI slop isn't going to create that value for the customer because it's not going to be great content necessarily, but actually perhaps more importantly, it doesn't differentiate you. And one of the things that we certainly know, we did talk about in the marketing module on this program, is long-term success from a marketing standpoint is about meaningfully differentiating you, your company, your brand, your products, your services, meaningfully differentiating from your competitors. So differentiation means we're different. Meaningful means in ways that actually matter to your customers and they'll value. You can't be meaningfully different with sort of, in some sense, slop, generic AI generated content that everybody else can create. And so strategically, AI slop is not a winning strategy. But even if it doesn't look like AI slop, creating content that isn't really finely tuned to what your customers, current and potential future customers, will find valuable isn't going to land and create that value. So AI can help. Again, it's back to this point about AI as your enabler, sort of augmented intelligence, not purely automated artificial intelligence. It's there to help enable you to do better work, not to take the humans out of that out of that loop, because at the end of the day, the customer still is a human. And what businesses are really trying to do, and marketing, in my case, is really trying to do is develop relationships between the humans in the organization and the humans in the marketplace. That's fundamentally what we're doing. We can automate parts of that. We can have agents do some things. We can have bots and whatever else, but we are still in a human-centric world,
Yeah, very interesting.
fortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, and hopefully more companies kind of align to that to give us more precise marketing addressing our immediate needs. On customers, are there any behavior changes that have surprised you in your work? Recent behavior changes in customers?
Oh, I mean, it's funny because it's funny you ask it, because a lot of sort of customer behavior or consumer behavior is psychology. Um, and how humans make decisions, how humans pay attention to things or not pay attention to things, and so on. So human psychology, which is also linked to how our brains are wired, um, doesn't change that fast. But the triggers, if you will, or the stimulus, or the stimuli, that prompt certain sort of psychological reactions in humans or consumers as humans, obviously can change. And so, I mean, the biggest change that we've been seeing, now over decades is, digital platforms like social media, now AI, consumer-facing digital platforms that change the way that we gather information and we process that information to help us make decisions. So I wouldn't say there's like been a big radical shift. I'd say this is a gradual shift over time. Um, and businesses just have to be on top of that and adept with sort of adapting to those changes. So the way that customers might make decisions hasn't fundamentally changed, but the places they get information, where and how they engage with companies, and therefore the expectations they have around those types of engagements, that obviously changes. I guess with the rise of large language models and generative AI in the last few years, and that becoming much more of a consumer technology, that's very, very accessible. What we probably are seeing now is a shift is consumers being more reliant on those models, those AI platforms, to help them make decisions. Just the way that I was talking about AI is enabling, businesses to make better content or better strategies or whatever else. We are all using these as sort of shopping tools, in one way or another. Um, and so that's a shift, but it's not that big of a leap from us using a search engine. It's just a different way of gathering and synthesizing that information. So it's a change for sure, and therefore businesses need to be thinking about how to show up in that environment versus other digital environments. But it's really just a continuation of this sort of evolution of where information comes from that people will base their decisions on.
Yeah, it's amazing what companies can now gather on customers, the data that they can collect to market more specifically. But for
Mhm.
you as a consumer, how do you feel about that? How do you view it?
Well, as long as data is collected and used responsibly, which is a big, I guess, a big assumption that we have to make, or a bit of a leap of faith sometimes. I think that's good, because what do I want as a consumer, or what would most consumers want? You want you want information to help you make an informed decision. And it doesn't really matter if I'm buying, I don't know, a tube of toothpaste, or if I'm buying a car. I still want to make the right choice. Sure, one of those decisions has a lot more risk inherent in it because of the price point, but I still want to make good choices. I don't want to waste my money, even if it's small amounts of money, on lousy products or products that actually turn out not to be suited to me. So the more that data can be used to help tailor an offer to me, or personalize information and so on, the better. I think that I've always been a proponent of personalization in marketing for sure, as long as data are used appropriately. What I think is interesting though, just to link it to Gen AI is, um, well, I think we're not yet getting our heads around fully is how much knowledge and, well, data based, but let's call it knowledge that these large language models have of their users, particularly because we're seeing a lot of consumer, just sort of regular user usage of these models as um, you know, people to chat to almost, like have a chat with ChatGPT about my deep inner worries about life, or using them as sort of pseudo therapists, or people using them to journal. And, so the more that people open up to a LLM in very private ways about their inner thoughts, the more it structures its knowledge around that individual. And that is something that I think, rightly so, we all need to start getting our heads around, because if that's not just sort of data from a company that gives away my credit card details, or other sort of personally identifiable information. It's a lot deeper. It is personal information, but it could be very, very, very sort of detailed and deep. And I'll give you an example in a marketing context. So I did a sort of a thought exercise, and actually anybody, you can do this yourself. Ask your LLM of choice, what are my values as a person? And it will give you some description of you, and the more you've been using it, the more accurate that is going to be, and the more it's going to be like holding a mirror up to you. And then I said, okay, but what are my values as a consumer? And they were very similar to my values as a person. And then I sort of said, okay, well, now I'm on the market for a product in this product category of these sorts of brands. Can you come up with a set of 5 recommendations that I should look into, without prompting it to align that with my personal values? So I came up with some recommendations. I said, how did you come up with these recommendations? Then gave me an equation basically that said, here are the things that I considered, the sort of the product attributes, and here are the weights I put on them. All but one of them linked to my personal values. Because what I was trying to do is maximize my utility, to use an economics term, by giving me recommendations that it thought I would be most satisfied with if I purchased those products. And of course, it was trying to align them with how it understood me as a person, and therefore my values. So when we think about data, I guess that application, that example I just gave there is where data in an AI context could be, very effectively used to match people with products, or people with brands that would really align with who you are as a person. And that might be great, but if that data got into the wrong hands, or it could be manipulated, or it could be sort of monetized in a certain way. Or you could imagine, I know OpenAI has been talking about building advertising into ChatGPT, which I think is not a good idea. I understand it from their business model standpoint, but I think, this is where things could go wrong, because, consumers are trusting LLMs to kind of give them credible, hopefully unbiased advice, but then it's going to get biased with advertising in there. But you can sort of see where you could buy, instead of buying keywords, you're buying consumer values, and you want to increase the weight of those values in a recommendation algorithm that's going to lead to putting your product on top. So it's a slippery slope. But I think the difference between just sort of the data Google has a value, or the data Meta has a value from, say, Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, it's not totally dissimilar, but because of the way large language models work and how comprehensive they can be, and the deeper knowledge structures and reasoning capabilities built into them, it means that you can have a much deeper picture painted of any individual than even, somebody who's been using Instagram for 20 years, or 10, no, I don't think it's been over 20 years, but for a long time, or using Google's platform services for 20 years would have. So it's moving into a new territory. So some of those concerns from the past, like, oh, Google knows too much about you sort of stuff, those concerns can apply to the AI models, but it goes deeper than that. And I think this is the kind of the next thing that we need to think about.
Declining cookies aren't going to do it anymore.
No, not at all.
Not at all. We've got a question here from somebody in the Q&A saying, what would be the most unconventional or surprising way you've seen a participant apply something from the course or one of your courses in a real business context?
Oh,
Something,
goodness.
Sorry?
No. I was just saying, what a good question. I'm not sure I've got a great answer for it though. I mean, we see lots of interesting things from our students, in this program, but in lots of different courses doing interesting things. So I maybe won't give a single example, but sort of a more sort of the general kind of pattern that we see. We always see, and this links back to my point about connecting the dots. One of the things that I love to see from people on this program, but also other programs around the schools, when people come in saying, well, I'm an expert on, one thing, because that's how they've built their careers so far. And then their sort of their horizon is totally expanded, because they're like, oh my gosh, now I see this other thing and this other thing and this other thing. And then it really shifts the way that they think about their career trajectory and the things that they get interested in. So I guess I don't know if it's maybe the most surprising thing, because this is what I've seen my entire career, but the thing that I love to see is with these sort of more general programs like MBA Fundamentals, combined with, our push to have people see how all the different parts of business fit together in a holistic and very comprehensive way. And coupled with sort of a broader purpose of business, not just seeing this as about, businesses are here to make money and deliver returns to shareholders, but to do good in the world and the communities that they serve, but to do that in a way, and this is what the final module actually of MBA Fundamentals is about, to do it in a way that is good for business and good for communities or good for society. When people have that horizon expanded, what I just see is it really changes their philosophy on their career. And so they go from saying, well, I just want to keep on climbing the ladder in my sort of functional discipline, to sort of thinking about bigger opportunities and different opportunities. Quite often we see people suddenly become an entrepreneur, or at least get a bit more of an entrepreneurial spirit in them if they haven't had that sort of background. And that's not because they suddenly discover a love of startups. It's because they start to see the world, sort of through a different lens, and a sort of a more multidisciplinary lens. And therefore they see different opportunities and different problems that you could solve by taking a kind of a multi-pronged approach, instead of, well, the solution to this is accounting, or the solution to this is marketing, or a better ad campaign, or streamlined supply chain, or whatever it might be. But they see things differently, and that's always really exciting.
That's great to hear. And jumping back a couple of topics, but I'm just wondering, how do you view, where are we going with agentic AI? Do you see in the near future? Do you think it's something that can be implemented? So we're moving away from just efficiency gains, right? We're moving to different kinds of gains through AI.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I take a step back, if I think about the last 6 months, what has changed in sort of the sort of leadership, even sort of C-level conversations around AI? It's gone from, we need to experiment, we need to learn, we need to try lots of different things, to we need to move fast here and do it in a way that is really strategic and value creating, not just cost reducing. So, and even in the last 6 months, there's been that sort of shift with the sort of the senior executives that I've been fortunate enough to talk to coming through all of our various programs. And that, over the course of, well, let's say a year, that can be, hundreds, if not thousands of leaders. So that's been a pattern. And then the other thing that's really popped up is what's our agentic strategy? Or what are we doing about agentic? How do we build agents? What are we using them for? How do we govern them? How do we control them? So practical operational questions as well as strategic ones around agentic AI. And I think that's the direction of travel in organizations. I think, it's one thing to put the tools into the hands of your employees. It's another thing to then do that at scale and in a way that is strategically valuable. And I'll give you one example. So, and it's an advertising industry example. So, there's a big company called WPP. WPP is one of the big advertising agency holding companies in the world. I'm sure many of you have heard of WPP, but they are one of the big players in the advertising industry. And if you think about it, advertising agencies increasingly over last, I don't know, 15, 20 years have become more and more and more technology enabled. Understandably so, particularly with the rise of digital. But with AI, that's accelerating. And so I was talking to the global head of agentic AI from WPP just the other day. And her job is in some sense to spearhead strategic uses and good practical uses too of agents across their organization with, I don't know, probably about 100,000 employees around the world, something in that ballpark. What they did is experiment first. They gave sort of agent building tools, no code tools to everybody on their own platform. And then they started sort of seeing what's getting created and then learning what those use cases are, and then scaling the ones and rolling out the ones that and putting them to sort of standard operating procedures, the ones that are really working. And so they sort of had an experiment, everybody have a go kind of thing, which they still allow, but then really elevating up the ones that are aligned with how they create value for their clients, and then sort of embedding them in sort of business as usual. And I think that's really what's going on with agentic in businesses at the moment. It's, what are we using this for? Let's try out lots of different things. But what we don't want to have is a workforce that is entirely an army of bots, essentially, an army of agents that gets unruly and out of control. So it's doing it in a way that's strategically aligned, but also sort of thinking about risk and risk management. I was talking to a chief technology officer of a bank yesterday, exactly the same conversation. Yeah, we've got agents, but we obviously are in a regulated environment. Risk is a big deal for us. So we need to think about how to do this in a very careful and measured way. But if we stand still and do nothing or go too slowly, then we're going to be left in the dust. So there's this tension, this leadership tension between, we want to move forward fast, but we've got to do it in a very careful, risk-oriented, and strategic way.
Fascinating. I was reading an article the other day by Anthropic of how agentic agents, when it's known to them that they will be replaced or upgraded, how they fight against it, how they try and manipulate it, which was a problem that Anthropic was struggling with.
Yep.
So you're very much in contact with people in the industry. That's obvious from chatting with you. So what are the most promising avenues for collaboration between academia and industry in digital marketing research today?
Well, I mean, we do a lot of collaboration. I mean, and not just in sort of my world of marketing and AI and the school, but around the school, I think a very common point of view among our faculty is we're business faculty in a business school in a university, sure. So we're academics, we do academic things, and we have our independence that way, and critical thought as well. But business is an applied discipline, or a set of applied disciplines. So if we're not out there talking to business leaders, developing case studies, doing research on businesses, and understanding what's going on in the business world practically, then we're sort of not doing our jobs. So I think at the core of Science Business School, whether it's in our programs, whether it's in the academic research that we do, it's all about making sure that what we do is relevant to the outside non-academic world. Now, in my case, the mechanism that, and every academic in the school has their own ways of doing this. For me, it's really two things. One, it's through programs like this and executive education. I had a former boss, a former dean, who used to talk about executive education as like the science lab for a business professor. Just like, if I was a chemistry professor, I'd probably have a lab with chemicals and all sorts of instruments in it. Well, in business, it's talking to business practitioners and leaders, and we do a lot of that through our programs. The other thing is we have research centers and research initiatives, and I run one in marketing called the Oxford Future of Marketing Initiative, which collaborates with a variety of organizations. There's about sort of 15 or so industry partners, companies like Google and Meta, or WPP, the advertising agency group I just mentioned, or Diageo or L'Oreal, lots of big consumer goods companies and big multinationals, but in sort of brands as well as tech, as well as advertising agencies, where we come together and we share our research with them so we can have an impact on marketing practice, and they share their challenges and ideas and opportunities with us in terms of what the big issues are in the industry at the moment that can help inform our research agendas moving forward. And that becomes, to me at least, a very, very useful mechanism for ensuring that the work that we're doing in our sort of proverbial ivory tower, and it's not lost on me that, Attie, you and I have pictures of old buildings in our backgrounds today, because that's the Oxford look. But, we could sit in those nice old buildings all day long and not have a clue what's going on in the outside world, but that's not the way we work. But the way to make sure that we know what's going on and our work is relevant and impactful is to have these relationships with the industry, with business leaders, and do that in fruitful ways. And so, yeah, that was just one example of how I do that. And that informs what goes into the programs, by the way. So they're relevant and up to date.
Yeah, it's going both ways, right? The
Mhm.
the relationship, and that's fantastic to hear. So thank you, Professor. I have a question for Alex, if you don't mind, because
Mhm.
we've seen this question come up a couple of times. Is what is the qualification to enter the program? What do you need in terms of qualifications?
So the main thing we ask actually is we don't have traditional entry requirements for this. We ask that you can pay the upfront funds in full as joining. Usually that's £3,500, but at the moment we're running a discount, which we'll come on to shortly. There are no other requirements to entry.
Yeah, and Alex, do you have any best advice for students with disabilities to apply?
So we would say apply through the website as standard, and we have a series of customer success officers that will make adjustments as and where required, depending on the individual case.
Fantastic, thank you. So Alex, if you don't mind, I've got a bunch of course questions that people have posted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of people that have asked around the duration of the course.
Sure. So it's a 10-week fully online program. The first week is the orientation period, where we will introduce you to the course platform, introduce you to your faculty, the other participants, get that sort of networking going. And then after that, it's 9 weeks of fairly intense back-to-back modules as we cover all areas of business, pulling the same faculty from the main MBA as we've touched on in the chat there. So you're looking at 10 weeks in total, 9 weeks of modules, some 7 to 10 hours of self-directed learning per week. So something like 90 hours in total. Yeah.
Yeah, and something I can add from my side is in those 10 weeks, every week you have a live session with run by the tutors. I'm one of the tutors on the course. There's two of us, which we run live sessions where we cover everything from helping you prep for the assignments. We cover what's coming up. We deliver some bonus content, which is always fun. We have interactive sessions, and then we're also very frequently joined by faculty, very similar to the session we had today with Professor Stephen. Alex, another question for you. Is there a certificate delivered after the course, and does it give you access to any further courses?
Yes, so provided you pass the course, we have a 50% pass rate. You'll be given our Oxford CPD certified certificate, which they're fairly highly sought after. Most people put them on LinkedIn, but I actually spoke to somebody recently who had it actually printed on the wall behind him, which was quite interesting. So they're very people are keen. So yes, you'll get a certificate, and you'll also be given the opportunity to join our alumni community as well. And essentially what that means is it opens you up to, so as well as all the networking on the course that you'll be able to do, you'll then have access to all of some 70 plus countries, many tens of thousands of members already. So all of the thought leadership that we offer, all of the events that we run, as well as a 10% alumni discount for future courses that you may wish to go on. So you're very much part of the club at that point.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, the alumni, I know from participants that I worked with, they very much like it. We've had a couple of posts online where people have actually gone and met up, not just in England. I know that a couple of times it's happened in Dubai where people meet up and where a lot of participants are from. There's the question around how this course relates to the actual MBA, right? And whether the credits here are transferable to the actual MBA, as well as does it help you in the application for the MBA?
So I think the thing to note is that this is different to the MBA. It's not a mini MBA necessarily. There isn't that connection to the MBA in the sense that if you do this, you'll get credits or transfer to the main MBA. They're very different courses in that sense, separate. But what it will give you is, as I say, that insight into the core subjects of the MBA, a flavour of all of the modules that come up, and an opportunity to engage with many of the faculty, as you say, from the main MBA. So you'll be in a position of strength to then decide further down the track. Having sampled the brand and met many of our faculty, do you want more of this? Would you like to apply for the main MBA further down the track? You'll be doing that from a position of unique confidence to somebody who hadn't, for example, done the MBA Fundamentals course. This gives you that insight. It allows you. A lot of people don't have a year plus to come to Oxford and do this. It's very much the fundamentals behind this program. So it's worth considering.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so we've got a question in the chat here about asking, there's a difference between the alumni and alumni. The network are different, and yes, they are different. But for how long do you have access to the alumni from doing this course?
So you're part of the alumni community. It's ongoing after you've finished. If you choose to join, you'll have, as I said, access to the code. It's slightly different to the alumni. There's a slightly higher discount for some of those courses. I believe it goes up to 15%. Slightly different events that run, but alumni is very much its own thing. It's been growing in the background over the period of years. The networking opportunities are very strong. The thought leadership is very strong. We actually had a participant who left one of our cohorts halfway through, and when we asked them what had happened, it was because they'd actually got another job from somebody that they'd met on the course. So that, the networking opportunity. Not that we're encouraging dropouts, of course. We prefer you finish, but just to note that the networking is very strong from that perspective, which then continues on into the alumni community afterwards.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and so there's also some people in the chat and that have posted online for us asking around the course structure. Maybe I can quickly share some of that on the course structure. So the course at the moment is structured in 3 blocks. So we've got block A, block B, block C, and each block has 3 modules in them. And then assignments are also structured around the blocks. So when you complete block A, which is business strategy, customers and marketing and innovation and entrepreneurship, there's an assessment that brings those all together. And then we get back to what Professor Stephen and myself discussed earlier about that integrative holistic thinking, connecting all the dots and how that's the assessment. And then the same happens in block B, where it's operations management, finance, and off the top of my head, I don't have it, and business analytics. And that all comes together as well in an assessment. And then the last block as well, all together in one assessment, is people management and leadership, organizational design, and then one of the best ones, impact from within. Just scanning the questions.
There's been a lot of chat actually. I've been answering a number in the background. So thank you. The questions have been brilliant.
Thank you. And then one person also asked, will we be notified where to go? Zoom meetings? Yes, of course. Learning new software and programs and where to get the course content versus where we have the online meetings. It can be a bit disparate and a bit difficult to get into initially. And that's why we have an orientation call, and we'll help you through all of that and help you navigate and make sure you're all right. There's on each course, there's the tutors like myself, which is there to assist you on any course content related issues or help you and help promote your learning journey. And then there's also a dedicated success advisor who's there to assist you with, life happens and you might not be able to submit on time, and help you with administrative things like you couldn't upload a document or you can't access something. There's a dedicated person to assist with all those things. So there's nothing really to stress about on that front. Alex, that's all from my side.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Professor, again.
We have a final slide we'd like to show before we finish. Just to sort of talk about next steps. Obviously, we've covered a lot of content here today, and thank you all for your questions. And we'll be writing back to you for those who didn't where we didn't quite answer them. But we wanted to say, if you're interested in joining the MBA Fundamentals program, the next cohort is on the 29th of April. We have an application deadline of the 27th of April. There are still spaces on that course, but so that it is filling up fast. It's proving to be a very popular one. So please do apply if you're looking to do so within the next week or so, just to ensure that you don't miss out. We're actually also running a spring discount. It starts next month formally, but we're giving access to all of you who have joined this webinar early access to that 15% discount over the next couple of weeks. Some of you have commented on the price. Well, hopefully this will help. It knocks it down a little bit from the 3.5K that we normally ask for. So please take full advantage of that discount over the next couple of weeks and throughout April as we build towards the cohort starting. So there's a code there for enrolling and another code if you'd like to book a call to discuss any further questions with us ahead of the start date. It's also worth noting that we run a series of corporate discounts for block bookings on this course. So all organizations typically like to roll this through their leadership groups and through their organizations. And we get a sort of a series of those every cohort. And we're happy to facilitate that. And essentially what we can do is even better discounts for corporate block bookings. I think that's everything for now. So all that really leaves me to do is just to thank our panel again. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you all of you for joining. It's great to hear from you and get your feedback. Please do get in touch with any further questions. But that's all from us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.